Yeah, colleagues, I said we will continue with our debate, New Vision on Agriculture and Food. It's a big honor that the Commissioner, the European Commissioner for Agriculture and Food, Christophe Hansen, is with you. A very warm welcome to you. I think you have experienced that our members are very excited to discuss this and anticipated already the debate, but it's really important for us. And I have to say it's a big pleasure to welcome you here because I think you all know that Christophe Hansen is a former member of the EESC, so it's a double pleasure for us to have you here early in your mandate. And when we met recently, I was really grateful that immediately you agreed to address our committee. So I would like to congratulate you again on your appointment. I think it's really important, the addition of these words, and food. It shows really that also our commitment and our work in the last years for sustainable food production is really important, and it's also echoed now and I think reflected in your portfolio. We think that such a comprehensive approach is something that the EESC has been advocating for years, building on the extensive exchange of views with our members. Because as you know, I don't have to explain you, we represent organized civil society here in this house. This means also organized civil society across the food chain, including farmers, fishers, consumers, agri-food workers, food processing and retail companies, as well as environmental organizations. And we are, and this is important, we are also engaging with youth organizations as we apply the EU Youth Test to our opinions. So we are honored that you are with us today to present the recently published vision on agriculture and food, and we would like to thank you for having considered the work of the EESC in this context. We see also this vision as part of the international ambition to achieve sustainable food systems globally, in line with the Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. This vision effectively aligns with many key recommendations the EESC has been calling for in its opinions. In this context, we have on our podium today also the two rapporteurs of two opinions linked to the implementation of the vision. This is Emily Prouzet and Stoyan Chukhanov, respectively rapporteurs of the opinions to facilitate proper enforcement of rules tackling unfair trading practices and to strengthen the producer's position in the negotiation and conclusion of contracts. I know that 10 minutes to present the whole vision is a bit short, but it's really my pleasure. Please, Christophe, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you as well for the invitation, because, as you mentioned, for me it is a big pleasure to be back with you, because in 2017 and 2018 I was sitting on your side on behalf of the Luxembourg Chamber of Commerce at that time, and so it is a big pleasure. So I know as well the very valuable work that you are doing from the inside. And when I was appointed to be the next Agriculture Committee, I met with a good friend as well of Norbert Geisen, another member who is present today from Luxembourg, Jean-Claude Juncker. And Jean-Claude Juncker said to me, well, you know that to your predecessor I expressed my sincere condolences for this portfolio. And I asked him back in time then, why did you say so? And he said, well, because, you know, when something goes wrong, the farmers take it to the streets, and we had this only last year. And I replied, for me, of course, it is the biggest honor of my life to be in charge of our farming community, because they are creating the necessary goods we are consuming every day, we are eating every day, and as well drinking wine, for example, but as well they shape our valuable landscapes and cultural heritage. So for me it is very important to be their attorney, their voice as well, and fight as well for their interests. And as you have seen, we have published on the 19th of February, a little bit more than 1 month ago, the vision for the future of agriculture and food, which is the roadmap to take for the European farming and food producing community to set and ensure as well what is very important and what I described as our cultural heritage as well. And for me, this one of the first 100 days deliverables that we had, and we were very much thankful as well for your inputs for that, and I think it has been reflected as well in this this vision. And from then, of course, I hear from the farming community, I hear a strong call for more stability, for more predictability, and as well for the crucial recognition of agriculture and farming for our rural areas. And you all know the geopolitical context, along with increasing extreme weather events, has changed and has as well changed the landscapes. And just to mention the US tariffs that are confirmed today. And of course, I believe that in these changing and challenging times, we need a clear perspective and a coherent policy and policy responses for everyone involved in guaranteeing our food security and food sovereignty. And they need to see their future again to be more prosperous again. And the vision is, of course, the result of close engagement and consultation with many different stakeholders from the agri-food sector and all the relevant institutions, including the European Economic and Social Committee. And I would like to thank you for the multiple reports you have recently done on the future of agriculture and the common agriculture policy, which have become an important reference point for us when preparing the vision. And what I have to say, the vision is of course not legislation yet. It is only the starting point for our future cooperation and for our future directions that we take. And this has to be taken as well in dialogue. And that's why I'm very glad that I can exchange today here with you as well. And of course, our messages are very clear. In order to have a productive and sustainable farming, we must not only maintain farming across our continent, but also increase its attractiveness. And we urgently need farmers staying and new ones taking up this important profession. And farming, fisheries and food are, of course, a strategic sector and a critical asset for Europe. And this is clear from the political agenda from this Commission. And the vision identifies European food sovereignty as an integral part of the wider EU security agenda. And our policies will continue supporting farmers, fishers and as well the agri-food sector in producing safe and food, protecting rural landscapes, traditions and as well livelihoods. But we also have to strike a balance between the three dimensions of sustainability, and that is maybe something that has been a little bit forgotten in the past. We don't only have the environmental sustainability, we also have a social sustainability and an economic sustainability, and this balance needs to be struck very clearly. And therefore, of course, it is very important as well that we take into account the specificities not only of the sector and of the different production strains, but as well the differences that are and exist between our member states, and even inside the same member states you can face very different conditions, and that is why we have to focus and to our policies as well on a more tailored approach that takes into account these local needs and differences. And of course, the one guiding question, because we have a huge problem, which is the demography of our farming community, because currently less than 12% of the EU farmers are below the age of 40. You know that is the definition of a young farmer, and the average age of our farmers is above 57 years of age. So if we don't change direction today, we will not be able to ensure this food sovereignty and this production all over the continent. And that is why we asked a very simple question: how to build and support an agri-food system that is attractive for current and for future generations today, tomorrow and as well in 2040. And of course, against the backdrop of this main question, we have identified four major strains and pillars of work. And the first one is to create an attractive and predictable agri-food sector that ensures a fair standard of living and leverages as well new income opportunities. And of course, concerning income, we want to work on fair remuneration and better market returns for farmers. And therefore, it is very important today that we have the two rapporteurs on the Common Market Organization and the Unfair Trading Practices Directive, because there we can ensure a better and more secure income for our farmers. And this has been done in the second week of the mandate, of the new mandate of the Commission. So we were the first actually to present new legislation. And of course, for farmers to enter the profession and to produce, it is also important to pull on all possible income sources. We have as well to leverage new income opportunities, and therefore we put a lot of accent as well on bioeconomy, to have synergies in this area, to create new high qualified jobs in rural areas as well, because farmers often are as well forest owners, just as an example, so they can contribute as well to energy production, because this is another a very important security aspect. And also it is important that we continue, besides these new income, to continue with public support from the common agriculture policies, and this will of course is already clearly announced by the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, that she will always defend an income policy for our farmers. This is as well in line with our treaty obligations, and we have also the strategic dialogue report, which is part of my mission letter, which clearly states that we need a specific and commensurate budget for the EU agricultural policy, and that additional obligations and requirements to the sector should as well come with additional financing. This to be seen where this additional financing should be come from. But nonetheless, this is my my mission letter, and that is as well what I will push for when in the discussions of the next MFF that will begin soon. Also, I think it is very important that we make the common agriculture policy more simple, because this has been another big request by our farming community when they took it to the streets last year. So we will propose a first simplification package focused on the common agriculture policy by the end of April or beginning of May. But I travel to, meanwhile, 9 member states, and by the end of April I will be at 14 member states. What I learned from the farmers is that the common agriculture policy is not their major concern, and that's not where they feel the most administrative burden. But we have a lot of other legislation, environmental legislation. We have as well sanitary and health legislation, which with often very tight reporting timelines and with big fines to that. So I think there we need to make a second simplification package together with my different colleagues, Roswal, Vareli and so on, and this will be presented by the end of the year to reduce this administrative burden. And then of course, as I mentioned, one of the major priorities for 2025 will be as well the strategy for generational renewal that is not only EU policy. I think the member states have to contribute as well, because we see, for example, I mentioned less than 12% of EU farmers are below the age of 40. When you look to Austria, for example, they have 24% of young farmers that are below the age of 40, and they have done so with a retirement scheme that is more attractive to hand over the farm, and that is something where we need to look at back home as well. The second big priority is to have a competitive and resilient agri-food sector in the face of the rising challenges that I have just announced. So we need a fairer global level playing field. This applies as well when it comes to pesticides and animal welfare, where we have very strict rules in the European Union, but often products, agricultural products or food is coming in from third countries that have been treated with pesticides that are forbidden in the European Union. And there we have to be bolder and clearly say if it is bad for human health or for biodiversity in the EU, it is as well bad outside the EU. And there we have to bolder to have this reciprocity in, and that is clearly what we are working on and which is part of the agenda. But also I think it is very important to speak about the broader security agenda. I will come to that later on. It's not only that we have to work on our food sovereignty, but as well on the input to produce. And I think there we have a lot to do when it comes, for example, to fertilizers. So this is going way beyond the just food producing part of agriculture, because there is a lot of industry that needs to be taken into account and that needs to be boosted as well. Also, I think it is very important when we speak about the problems to enter the profession or to survive in the profession, is that there is a lot of risk. It is a lot of risk for investment. It is a lot of risk when it comes to losing crops because of droughts, because of floods, because of other effects, and therefore we need to have as well a more comprehensive approach when it comes to risk and crisis management. And then also I think when we speak about perspectives, we know that livestock is under pressure. The livestock has gone down in the European Union by 7.8% over the last 10 years. I think this is a trend that we have to take very seriously and do the right incentives to give as well as perspective to the livestock sector, and that is why we are working on a livestock strategy as well to give this this perspective there as well. Also, the third priority, we have to give and to create a future-proof agri-food sector that works as well hand in hand with nature, and therefore we need to retarget our policy to be less top-down and be more based on incentives, because the farming community and the food-producing community is willing to take up and to participate in the fight against climate change, for example. But we need to give them incentives as well for that, and I think that is something we will change, less top-down and more incentive-based. And then, of course, we need as well to better monitor the progress that our farms are doing, and that is why we will be working as well on a voluntary on-farm sustainability compass to see as well the inputs and the outputs, both economically but as well from the environmental side. And the fourth big priority is to strengthen the link between food and consumers, and promoting as well a fair living and working condition in our vibrant and well-connected coastal and rural areas. And therefore we will work on the EU Rural Action Plan and the Rural Pact to tackle those issues, and by holding annual food dialogues. But I think it is very important that we bring the information about balanced diets and good food as well back to the schools, and that is as well a national competence as well. But I think it is very important that the next generation gets this contact with the food producing community and as well learns to connect again with the rural areas. And I think it is very important as well to say, when I speak about security, having agriculture in all our European regions is contributing not only to food security but as well to general security, because we would have many rural areas without the common agriculture policy where there would be no more economic activity in those areas. Then we would be very vulnerable, for example, to forest fires, but as well to deserts in the end if nothing is anymore produced there. And as well, when we see about the physical security, we have our Baltic states, but as well Finland, that have common borders with Russia. And Finland, I'm going to visit Finland next week. Finland has 1,340 kilometers of common border with Russia. Without agriculture and forestry in those regions, what would be there? There would be no infrastructure, there would be no demographic presence, and this would be a serious, very serious security threat to the European Union. That is something where we have to work very strongly to support as well our rural areas and maintain the life in our rural areas. And I see that I'm already broadly over the time, so I will just conclude again that this is, of course, the beginning of the journey. It is a roadmap for the initiatives to take. So there are many initiatives, and you probably have identified them: generational renewal, a livestock strategy, the de-risking of the sector. So this is something where we will have to work, and I'm counting as well on your very valuable contributions to get there, because you are in a daily contact as well with the sector, and I would like to benefit from that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Running over time is really an exclusive privilege for commissioners, but as long as the intervention is so interesting and so encouraging, I really would like to thank you for this. We come now to our rapporteurs to present their opinions, and we will start with Emily Prouzet. Emily, you have 3 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. Commissioner, dear colleagues. Well, I'd like to start to recall that we all share the same objective here, which is to strengthen the role of farmers in the food supply chain. It's essential both for our food, but also for our competitiveness, and it's important for everybody throughout the chain. Strengthening the enforcement capacity of the authorities against unfair trading practices is a first step. We've said this again and again. Without enforcement, it's pointless to produce more and more of these rules. Now, to enforce these rules to cross-border practices is obviously crucial. There are 27 member states, but one single market. So, Commissioner, the EESC welcomes your proposal. It's not revolutionary, we understand. It does not change the existing legislative framework. Rather, it clarifies the tools which are available to the authorities. And we now do need to work towards better coordination, better cooperation between the national authorities, irrespective of the domain, but so as to fully help those making complaints in their procedures. We are worried about the number of rules which deal with rules which differ between member states. Because when you try to facilitate cooperation of the authorities on non-harmonized rules, then things get complicated. We know that the transposition of the directive has led to the development of quite different frameworks, quite often well beyond the original objective of protecting farmers. Some member states went further, or they went a different path at the risk of undermining the market. But they should not be able to impose these practices outside their own territory. How can operators therefore know which rules to apply? Imagine the legal uncertainty which would follow and the impact this would have on our inter-community trade. This is why we are asking the legislator to ensure that the regulation only applies to practices which are harmonized at a European level. Now, another point. We all know the difficulties we have in Brussels in dealing with certain issues which are shared by many member states and are key to farmers' daily concerns. Therefore, some member states fall back on themselves. They tend to renationalize their supplies. And again here, we very much believe in the single market, and we would ask the legislators not to develop measures which would legitimize these local national supply decisions. So to sum up, dear colleagues, Commissioner, our working group and our section believes that this text is useful as a first step, and we also believe in the single market. So we would ask for a rapid adoption without changing the spirit of the text, and I would ask my dear colleagues to support this report, which had a unanimous support in the NET section.
Merci beaucoup, Emily. Now over to Stoyan Chukhanov, NAT 937. Please, Stoyan, you have 3 minutes.
Well, thank you, Oliver. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner, to being here. As a farmer representing farmers in this House, I'm more than happy to express our really. Your vision brought, let's say, a hope for us, and that's very clear. So, being a rapporteur for some of the opinions related to the future of the CAP, I'm more than happy to see that you reflected some of our visions here that was actually delivered by the consensus from the study from the three groups in our committee. So we are more than happy that you address basically the core of the problem, and the core of the problem is the fair earnings for the farmers. And the speed you actually propose these changes in the CMO regulation, it's a strong signal for us that basically you're in the will to do that. And it's well received, believe me, because resilience is hard to measure. It's related to shock and crisis. And we don't want to check our resilience, the resilience of the base of the agri-food sector and chain, because this is the agriculture, European agriculture, and we want to really preserve and to safeguard the European model of agriculture. We are not other countries, we are not China, we are not United States. So we want to keep our model of agriculture, and by touching and changing some of the core of the rules, the Common Market Organization, actually you're doing the great job because you're hitting the target immediately. So we strongly support your proposal for the written contracts. Many small farmers and small producers are still victims from the middleman, which is unacceptable in European Union. It's unacceptable to sell below the cost of the production, because this is a modern type of slavery. And it's unacceptable in 21st century in Europe to keep going with this. I don't think somebody disagree with this. So establishment of the mediation mechanism, this is also a very strong proposal from your side, because in many member states we do not have this. So it's very hard to find a resolution, a quick resolution in some disagreements in between, especially the small producers and those with more power, bargaining power on the agri-food supply chain. So third proposal that we strongly support coming from your side, it's the rules how to use fair and equitable. Because among the member states we have a different approach to those. And also about the short supply chain, this is also something debatable among still debatable. We have a clear definition, but in some member states it's not respected. So you have our support in this journey, and we know it's going to be long. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stoyan. We come now to the debate with our members. Yeah, you deserve the applause. The first speaker is Josep Puceo.
À la gauche, à la droite. Bon, merci. Perdón, señor comisario.
My apologies. So, Mr. Commissioner, you're very welcome to our house. I'll speak in Spanish. I know you understand it very well. And I'd like to start my 2 minutes by saying that, as shown through your speech and in your first 100 days in office, you're one of our own. You're here at the EESC, you're also one of our own because of your vision and for the work that you've done already. So I'll be brief. What I'd like to say is that we're facing a new situation. We have a new Parliament, new Commission, the strategic dialogue has been launched, and we're in a new era in which, as you are doing, we need to underscore the value of a European agri-food system that ultimately has a lot of potential. It's very powerful, with positive trade balances, and many of the 27 member states, in those member states, the agri-food system, the agriculture system, industry, trade, consumption, all of that, that's the first sector, the highest ranking sector in manufacturing industry. That applies to Spain too. Now we can speak about defence, which is very urgent, but this is the priority sector. Now 80% of the EU is rural, and that's what we want to keep alive. You said this in your speech already. We need to look at this through our strategy. You mentioned Finland specifically. We need to support a young sector, a sector that defends competitiveness, high quality and efficiency in the global market. That's your work, that's our work, and we will support you. Our sector stands ready to compete. We're ready to compete in all domains. Trade deals with Mercosur, with India. Why? Because we have high quality, added value products. And that means we should remain leaders. And we need to support farmers, entrepreneurs, small businesses in our rural societies in Europe. Thank you.
Next speaker is Peter Schmidt.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much, President Oliver. Thank you. And thank you very much, Commissioner, for being here with us today. For the NAT section, this is a very important moment for us, really. Now, let's see what your thoughts are. You were a member of the committee, so you'll know when a commissioner is here at the beginning of the mandate, they have to fulfill 3 wishes. And I do have 3 wishes I'd like to express to you, and we'll see how it goes in terms of trying to make these come true, I suppose. The first thing that we'd like to see, I mean, we were very happy that the strategic dialogue was set up in Brussels with Mr. Strohschneider as chair, and I know you refer to that time and time again. We would like to see some sort of follow-up to that dialogue. Not necessarily via the EBAF. What we want is a follow-up dialogue with civil society that would be inclusive. And as representatives of civil society, we're capable of organising this kind of dialogue. For many years, we worked on the European Food Policy Council. So we are here, we're available as a sort of convening space to try and make this happen. Then my second wish I'd like to express is that we could participate as observers within the EBAF, because that would mean that we would be able to use the ties that we have here in our house with the Commission, with civil society. We could build more of those ties too. And then thirdly, and thankfully we heard this from agriculture ministers recently this week, in fact, during the council. My third wish is that when we look at this massive competition, this race for more money, etc., which really deals with the military side of things at the moment, when we turn to the food side of things, the food supply chain, when it comes to that kind of competition, food security should not fall by the wayside. We need funds to be dedicated to this too. Then fourthly, this isn't really a wish, it's more of a comment I really would like to make on what you said. The first 3 things are things I would like to see, and I hope that at some point we'll be able to come back and see that those have been, realised. But the 4th thing I'd like to say is that we think if we really want to have fair prices for farmers, and this is something we have to do, otherwise none of this is going to work, then we need to come back to food speculation. Because, the fact that 4 major corporations in the world have 80% of the food market, that doesn't make any sense. And if we manage to tackle these issues, then I think we will manage to have a sustainable agricultural sector and make sure that it can play a positive role. So thank you very much for being here with us, and we hope that we'll be able to greet you among us in the NAT section too. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Hansen, I come from Finland and represent Finnish farmers and forest owners here in the committee. You are warmly welcome to my country next week. I would like to thank you for your vision on agriculture and food. You set many excellent objectives for European agriculture policy. I wish you best success in implementing your vision. We still lack the information on the financing of the policy. I wish you also every best success for MMF negotiations. Good policy needs adequate funding. Another point I would like to raise is the rural policy. You have spoken warmly in favour of vibrant countryside in Europe. I would like to ask what practical measures you are planning for our rural areas. I hope that you will continue to implement the excellent long-term vision for European rural areas. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Simo. Next speaker is Arnold Püstalissak.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, President, Commissioner. As spokesperson for the farmers here within the committee, I'd like to thank you for your words, which made us quickly forget your predecessor. The Commission needs to keep making sure that farmers don't have to sell their products below the cost of production, because that causes massive damage. And you said that, and I think that's a great initiative, really. I think the proposal on the reform of the unfair trading practices is something that's a good one. We'll do what we can there as well. It's clear in Luxembourg and Bulgaria, for example, the cost of production isn't the same. That needs to be taken into account. So we have, of course, different costs of production, and within a single market, how do we tackle that issue? Then finally, I'd like to say something else on the budget. Now, you know, when you buy a house, a car, a kitchen, a scooter, whatever it may be, often you'll be asked, you know, what's your budget? So my question to you, Commissioner, is what's your budget?
Next speaker is Maria Nicolopoulou.
Thank you very much, President. Welcome back, Commissioner. I'm very pleased that you mentioned social sustainability, because I did want to ask about that, specifically social conditionality under CAP. We know that the work in that area is very arduous. Salaries are low. Conditions are quite tough, in particular when there are heat waves, for example. There's undeclared work, people migrating for work. And often they're in vulnerable situations when they do so. So the trade unions have always supported this measure. We think we need to strengthen local laws to improve the conditions of those working in the fields and farmers in general. So what I'd like to ask is, what's the state of play with regard to implementing that specific measure, with regard to it being in force in all member states? Can you give us any additional information in that regard? And what about any assessment of the initial impact of the measure? Secondly, then, we need to speak about the position of women in farming and rural life. Looking at the discussions that have taken place in that area, usually what comes up is access to finance to carry out projects as an issue, access to land, and often the lack of structures and mechanisms to combat gender-based violence, and also care with regard to childcare and care for others. Unpaid work in that area, often it falls to women to undertake that work. So I'd like your opinion on that, the work-life balance, and how to strike it in a better way. Commissioner for Equality, Labib, is working in this area, but I'd like your thoughts on it too. Thank you.
Because Norbert Geisen.
I'll be speaking French. Thank you very much, President and Commissioner. Christophe, when it comes to the food sector, it is a very concentrated sector. We have studies which give us an idea of the issues within this sector and the direction that it could take without corrective measures being taken in the coming years. As a representative of the trades, I think that this concentration that we're seeing is having an impact on us, particularly when it comes to the transitioning away from traditional production. We see overall turnover within the food sector going up, but the number of companies is going down and jobs are being lost because of the automation of this sector. So this is a very worrying trend. The loss of jobs, of course, is a result of the increasing innovative productivity that we have. I think this will have an impact on society's ability to provide food, because more and more production is being centralized in major production sites, and that goes against the sustainability that we are seeking to achieve. So we need to make sure that we harmonize all of our objectives here and make sure that we can produce healthy and sustainable food. It's really urgent that we take measures at the European level in order to preserve this sector, which can contribute to having more sustainable food, more higher quality food as well. Regulation at the EU level must protect SMEs against the obstacles that they're facing as well. I think that would be a good way of making sure that these companies don't disappear. We also need more ambitious policy to promote regional and local food sources. Thank you very much.
Beaucoup. Next speaker is Maurizio Reale.
Okay. Bienvenue, Monsieur le Commissaire. Je suis très...
Welcome, Commissioner. I'm very pleased to see you here again in this House.
Bien. Alors, per quello che riguarda...
As for what you said, well, we are very satisfied with your message. This confirms the message you sent out in Rome. This important message was confirmed also when you met the leaders of Coldiretti. We rely on you for a CAP reform which will be fair and which will reflect the needs of various farmers. Dear Commissioner, it's fundamental that in doing this the resources should go to the farmers. In the Eurobarometer, 77% of European citizens are calling for this. In order to do this, it's essential that the CAP has full autonomy, and we should avoid pooling CAP resources in a single vessel with the cohesion funds. This could pose a real problem. And now, as chair of the ODD, I would just say that I'm happy with your realistic rather than idealistic approach when it comes to managing all matters related to sustainability. Thank you, Commissioner.
Maurizio. Next speaker is Bohumir Dufek.
Pane komisaři, kolegové a kolegyně, jistě se mnou budete souhlasit.
Thank you, Commissioner. Dear colleagues, I'm sure you will agree with me when I say that we are living in turbulent times. We're living in difficult times. Now we need to move from words to action. We must never forget that there are also consumers out there. Consumers can feel the question of quality and price every day. So we need to monitor food imports because there are a number of EU contracts which are running. But we're not really monitoring the production, particularly the use of certain chemicals and pesticides. For the farmers, this is being perceived as a disadvantage for our side because we don't see fair conditions. We don't see a level playing field here. For example, we have the Mercosur agreement, and farmers say that, look, someone should explain this to us. Someone should have consulted us, is what they feel. So there isn't a lot of support for the Mercosur agreements. You said that farmers need to be protected from monopolies, large monopolies, who take advantage of the farmers and who take advantage of their own dominance. So, obviously, we need to ensure that all conditions are respected, but farmers should not be drowned in red tape, which makes their work all the more difficult. In our view, it is now necessary to simplify the controls linked to this kind of support. So, Commissioner, I would appreciate it if you could also take the social side of things into consideration at a farm-by-farm level. I'm convinced that food will remain a strategic issue going into the future, and it already is now and will continue to be so. So we need to simplify the situation for individual farmers.
Next speaker is Arnaud Schwartz.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, President. Good morning, everybody. Commissioner, I'm speaking on behalf of France Nature Environnement, and I myself am a farmer. You will know how important dialogue is here in reaching consensus. And I'm sure you'll remember that, and you'll be aware of that in terms of the consensus, the strategic dialogue. And I think that's really important in this conversation, because this is what will provide sustainability to our society. And you talked about the need for sustainability, societal, economic sustainability, which is really based on our food industry, because without it, there's no future for society. So beyond the vision that we're hearing, we expect action. So you have our encouragement. We'd like to see all of this translated into action. We want to make sure there's a focus on the most vulnerable. That's something that came from the strategic dialogue. We also want to make sure that we have a diet which is more healthy for all. And questions remain about some of the CAP decisions that are being taken, because farmers are still paid so poorly despite the work they do. So we're still wondering why, given our work is one of the most impactful on the environment, we continue to not be able to solve all these problems.
Stefan Padure.
Domnule comisar, fermierii din România, la fel ca cei din mai multe state membre, noi și-au respectat.
Romanian farmers, just as farmers and in other member states, have met all their obligations. However, the convergence of external direct payments will only reach 70% in 2027. It is essential to be more flexible in allocating payments per surface in order to reach the minimum level of 90% of the EU average starting with 2022 and to finalize external convergence by 2034. On a single market, farmers should receive fair treatment and subsidies should be allocated in a balanced manner among member states. To this end, the future MMF should include the commitment that the level of direct payments per hectare will be considered. It is difficult to run with if you don't have all the conditions, and it is very important to help our farmers.
Thank you very much. Nächster Sprecher ist Lutz Ribbe.
Next up, Lutz Ribbe. Thank you. Commissioner, you've made a good start, and you've received a lot of support for this vision. There are goals in the vision that I think everybody could subscribe to and support. There's no question about that. But I don't really think there's anything new in terms of the structures, food security, sustainable food production methods, environment, protection of biodiversity, etc., etc. All of this is in the CAP for years now. And I mean, it wouldn't make sense if it wasn't. 15 years ago, I was a rapporteur on one of the reforms in this area, and we discussed all of this back then. Yet we continue to see all of the problems still today, and we're headed in the wrong direction, I think. So I think it's going to come down to developing new instruments, because the old ones haven't worked. I represent various different environmental organisations as well, and on page 18 of the vision, I see here that you talk about the opportunities in this transition could be a positive agenda for European agriculture. I mean, yes, 100%. But I'm not really sure what you mean when you talk about the opportunities there when it comes to environmental protection. I know that all of these things, biodiversity protection, etc., is seen as more of an obstacle than a support by farmers, and quite rightly. So if you do manage to do this for farmers and for society, to create a market for these products which respects the environment and biodiversity. And that market doesn't yet exist today. If every euro that's put into the CAP can have, double the influence it has today and work in a way that is positive for the environment and positive for the farmer, then you'll have achieved something incredible. So I think we need, sustainable, constant incentives for environmental practices. And I think there's a lack of proper instruments that can allow us to do this. I think the strategic dialogue has touched on this and has put forward some ideas. So, Commissioner, I would hope that you and the Commission can put forward a paper pretty soon which details, on the one hand, the instruments and the objectives of the strategic dialogue, and then on the other hand, the Commission's position to all of these and what you're going to be taking up and what you won't do and why not. Thank you.
Speaker Luís Mira.
Obrigado, Sr. Presidente. Em primeiro lugar, gostaria de felicitar.
Thank you. To begin with, I would like to congratulate you, Commissioner, for the vision that you've set out for the future of agriculture. I think it does meet the needs of the agricultural sector and of farmers. To translate it into action, then, we'll need a proper budget in order to reach the objectives that are set out in the document. Now, the Commission has made an announcement in terms of the MFF and the money that will be dedicated to defence, for example, but I hope that money won't be taken away from agriculture in order to fund those other areas. Can you guarantee us that you will do your utmost in order to increase the budget which is necessary for agriculture? And then my second question is linked to the commitment to maintaining the two pillars of the CAP in order to ensure predictability and certainty in the long term. We have trade wars happening internationally, and so that will be necessary. And then to wrap up, I would think for consumers, we never thought that our generation would know war in Europe or scarcity of food. But if the CAP doesn't do its work, then that could become a reality. Thank you.
Thank you, President. Good morning, Commissioner. Good morning, everybody. Like my colleagues, I too am encouraged by your words, and I'm looking forward to the follow-through. And you mentioned in your speech correctly about changing from the top down to the bottom up. But one thing I would ask you from the top down to pursue strongly is the image of agriculture. Because I believe I am a farmer and I am also an environmentalist. But the narrative has been lost and it has discouraged a whole generation of young people, especially in my member state, from entering agriculture because the image is very bad. And you absolutely correctly say generational renewal is of critical importance. We have had a mass exodus from the industry and we need to make it more attractive. Like my colleagues, I too support a well-funded CAP, but we also need sweeping simplification, not just tinkering around the edges to reduce the bureaucratic burden that farmers believe that they are buried under. And an example of this, perhaps, is Gate 2. It could be reviewed under the review. And I also hope to be the rapporteur in terms of the European Economic and Social Committee's opinion for the simplification. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. And last speaker is Felipe Medina.
Dear Commissioner, thank you very much for being here today. A year ago, farmers were protesting and demanding, among other things, less bureaucracy and less regulation. In response to these mobilizations, the Commission has proposed measures to help them, measures that suppose more bureaucracy and more regulation, but this time for the rest of the operators of the food chain. The regulation you have proposed, requiring payments above production cost, is inspired by a Spanish regulation. You should know that the application of this regulation in my country, Spain, is causing serious legal uncertainty for businesses, additional costs and regulatory burdens, more bureaucracy and, above all, a severe loss of competitiveness, which is precisely what this Commission has promised to combat. There is nothing wrong with improving a small farmer's position within the chain, but we must avoid implementing measures that negatively affect the rest of the operators. It makes no sense to harm more than 20 million people working in the cooperatives, food industry, retail and wholesale sectors to support farmers, neither negatively affect more than 400 million consumers. Please take a supply chain-wide perspective for every legislative measure you propose. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for all the contributions. Now we are coming back in the reversed order to our podium. We will start with the reply of Stoyan Chukhanov, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Bon,
Thank you, President. Well, I mean, I can't reply to all of the interventions from colleagues, but I've taken note of everything, and I'm sure we'll discuss all of this in detail. I think we need a lot more time to discuss everything we've heard from you. Now, I would like to thank you, Commissioner, for being here with us, for presenting the vision during the General Assembly, which was held in Bulgaria 2 weeks ago. I just want to tell you that your presence was very well received. The vision that was presented was very well received as well. In some of the countries on the edge of Europe, in rural areas, we can feel abandoned a little bit, and that goes especially for farmers. So I think the language that you use, the commitment that you've shown, it's really leading to a big change in terms of the position on agriculture, and that's being felt by farmers. Now, you're a commissioner on agriculture, and so I did want to just say a few things on this in terms of the biggest obstacle that we have and the biggest thing we need to do. Yes, we're speaking French. So I do really wish you the very best of luck, because, I mean, I think you're going to face a lot of opposition, and we've seen that already, but you will hopefully be able to defend this proposal in Parliament too. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Stoyan. Now, please, Emily.
Alors de même, je ne pourrais pas.
Well, the same for me. I mean, I can't go into everything that we heard, but we've heard a lot about price, pay, etc. So, Commissioner, allow me to state one thing, that we have a single market, and I believe in the food sovereignty of Europe. Mr. Letta spoke about the fact that renationalisation of supply chains is not a solution. Then 2 requests I have. First, let's base ourselves on the data that we have. The Commission launched 2 evaluations, one on the UTP directive and one on existing pay systems, both public and private, so wherever, France, Spain, etc. And we're very much impatiently awaiting those assessments so that we can try and find a solution to these things. My second request then, the strategic dialogue and the collaborative spirit within that dialogue is something that you spoke about, and within our working party we really supported that. I think it is absolutely essential that we keep that going. Polarisation will lead to nothing. I'm from France. I can reassure you that it won't lead to anything, and we need to fight that. Thank you.
And now the last intervention, the reply is up to the Commissioner. Please, the floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Et moi aussi, j'ai énormément.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I would really like to respond to all the questions, but I think since I have 5 minutes, that would be quite tricky. But I'd like to make some points, certainly. I think Mr. Chukhanov has addressed compliments to me from my participation in Bulgaria. I'd like to thank you for that. It's very important for me to have a dialogue and links with stakeholders. I don't think we should stay in our ivory towers when we're doing politics. We need to go out there beyond the ground in farms and in the areas where the people are. And I will continue in that vein. Now, Mr. Tianen did indeed say that next week I'll be in Finland, and personally I don't particularly know those farmers very well in that area. There's a big difference between your farming and farming that takes place in Cyprus, for example, and it's these differences, divergences, that need to be taken into account when we craft our policies and politics into the future. So that needs to be taken into account by member states, without losing sight of the cap, which needs to be our North Star to guarantee our single market, but also to guarantee fair conditions between the different member states and their producers. Now, Mr. Riba made a comment saying that there were a lot of good initiatives and some nice words that you've heard before, and that it's now time to work based on the reality of the situation. Now, I was very clear, we need to work on incentives rather than just putting an instrument in place and hoping it is successful. So we need to work with farmers on those incentives. Many of you mentioned the budget. Mr. Puech-Dalissac, you said, of course, without a budget, nothing can be done. And that's right. And I'd like to be clear on this point. As I've said, we can't now say that we'll have more priorities with the same money to achieve those priorities, because ultimately that won't serve any of the priorities well. So we have an EU budget which represents about 1% of our GDP, and around 1/3 of that goes to agriculture. But what are we speaking about here? We're speaking about 0.3% of our GDP then. So it's quite a low amount to be able to achieve these priorities. And of course we're dealing with more than agriculture here. As Norbert Geisen has said, there are SMEs in these sectors that process agricultural products into other products. That needs to be taken into account. So there's a whole other economy at play here. There are those who produce machinery for agriculture. I've been in member states visiting such places where there's real innovation in agriculture. And so we need to take into account that 0.3%, well, that figure, we need to bear that in mind, that there are other economies that play into agriculture as well. Mr. Schmidt, you asked me about, called on me to be more involved with EBAF and so forth. What I could say is on EBAF there will be a conference on the 8th of May that will focus on the vision for agriculture, and all members of the committee are of course invited to that conference. At the conference there will be discussions that will take place with stakeholders. So I think that's a very important element to stress. Ms. Bruzet, you said with regard to the Unfair Trade Practices Directives, we had a minimal adaptation here because there's gaps when it comes to cross-border enforcement. There will be a follow-up, there will be a review that will take place to assess the evolutions that have taken place. Now, numerous were the speakers who spoke about the need for farmers to not be forced to send their products for below production cost. Now, it's difficult to define what production cost is. Production cost will change from one farm to another because some are more effective than others, and it will also vary from member state to member state. So what we've done with the obligatory contracts, what's foreseen under the UTP directive, no one can refuse such a contract. But we've really shone a light on this area, and we think it's very important because it's the farmer themselves that know what they've harvested in a given year. It's they that know how much they need to survive. So we've taken steps in that area, and that's an approach that takes local differences into account also. What's important is that when farmers are in producer organisations, they have even more negotiation strength. That needs to be strengthened in some member states. It's well used as a concept in some member states, but for historic reasons in other member states less so. So I think work can be done in that area too. Now everything needs to take place within the framework of dialogue. Many of you, Maria for example, spoke about this, in particular social conditionality. that's something that's very important, because we know that in some sectors there's exploitation of workers. Member states like Italy, Ireland and others have from an early stage, from 2023 onwards, applied the social conditionality. From 2025 onwards is mandatory for all member states. That's a step forward. But there are also laws linked to work and enforcement and controls, and that's work that needs to be undertaken at member state level. So we need to be really demanding when it comes to respect for the existing laws and their enforcement. That's very important. As touched on by many of you, is that we're in a new era. In recent years, we put environmental sustainability at the heart of these matters, to the detriment of other elements to some degree. So now we're focusing also on competitiveness and productivity, placing them at the core of our concerns. And that's because if we can deliver this competitiveness via the simplification that the Commission started during this last mandate, and I'm building on now with our simplification package, and at the end of the year, Mr. Dombrovskis, who will be there, he will be looking at all this very closely. It will affect many sectors, not just farmers and agriculture. It will also affect SMEs, who face many of the same problems when it comes to excessive regulation. We need to say clearly that there are some things that are doable for big groups, but for SMEs it would be very difficult to do. They don't have the labour force, and we can't have compliance officers in every single sector in every company. That's not possible. That needs to be taken into account. And there, I think, we need to harness the opportunities that we have, such as the 8th of May conference. I've invited you for your input at that conference. And we also look at your contributions through your reports. That will be very helpful when it comes to my discussions with my colleagues and the commissioners, because we sit down to decide on these things together. I have an excellent team. And just to reiterate, I'm also ready to come back here to the plenary or to the working groups if you wish. And I'd be very happy to continue our work for the agri-food sector together. And that's because it's also linked into security and sovereignty and independence, which is close to my heart. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Just one last word, because you said you're available also for future exchanges. We stand ready to support you in this mandate, and there are already, I can announce, there are already some own initiative opinions which will further contribute to your work, and we are happy to share them with you in the next month. Commissioner Dombrovskis is waiting. If you have only a few seconds, we have to vote on the two remaining opinions. We start with NUT 945. Emilie Prouzet, Rapporteur. The vote is open. One more?
Two, because we have a delegation.
Okay.
Please.
And the vote is closed. We have to add 2 votes in favor. So 188 in favor, 3 abstentions. Congratulations. And the second one, NUT 937, Stoyan Chukhanov is the rapporteur. The vote is open. And the vote is closed. 188 in favor, 3 against, 3 abstentions. Congratulations as well.